he's been around for a while. He's an IP technologist and educator. I know him mostly from him educating me on stuff that I then claim to be an expert on and try and get a job. He frequently speaks at events, VidTrans, SMPTE, NAB, IBC. He's a founding member of the VSF, the Video Services Forum, and currently co-chairs the RIST Activity Group. So if you want to know anything about RIST, I would suggest maybe talking to Wes would be a good idea. He was honoured with an Emmy Innovator Award for his work on the committees that developed the widely deployed IP standards, VSF TR03, 2110, and so on and so forth. He is a SMPTE Fellow, so show some respect. And serves as the Secretary and Treasurer of the Connecticut Subsection. I give you Wes Simpson.
Well, thank you. So Paul asked me to come out here today to talk about some new things that we're working on in the Video Services Forum. Now, you might say, why in the VSF? Well, we have a history of doing that. If you look at SMPTE 2110, the precursor to that, VSF TR03 and TR04, were developed in activity groups within the Video Services Forum. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on is doing a good job technically without burdening things too much with the dotting every I and crossing every T. So we generally finish our job and then send it along to SMPTE, and that becomes an official ISO registered due process standard. So that's exactly what happened with TR03, TR04, turning into 2110. If you're familiar with SMPTE 2022, that work was all driven by people from the Video Services Forum. And so we're doing exactly the same thing for IPMX. We have an activity group. We've been meeting for well over a year now to drive a new video format that's going to be useful outside of the professional broadcast area. So that's really what IPMX is all about. And IPMX stands for the IP Media Experience. Okay? I didn't come up with the name, but it's cool. I like X's capitalized in the middle of words. So we'll talk a little bit about the market drivers, the benefits, and then we'll dive into the technology so you get a good understanding of that. And if we have time left over tonight, I have a couple slides about the new revisions of 2110 that just came out. So we'll see what happens there. So hopefully you can see that. So just like 2110 and TR03, TR04, these were developed in response to needs that were defined by the Joint Task Force on Networked Media. I was part of that original committee. We started sitting together, I believe it was in 2013, 2014. And the idea behind IPMX, okay, is that we wanted to be able to have a lot of the benefits of 2110 without some of the extra costs. We want to make it more accessible for the pro AV market. We want it to be able to work on lower cost switches. We want it to be able to work without precision time protocol. And we want it to handle some of the extra things that you need in the pro AV market, including support for high definition content protection, et cetera, et cetera. So, security, access, authentication, and control encryption as well as content encryption. We can carry encrypted content over IPMX in a multicast environment, and we'll show you how we make that little trick work. Media, uncompressed video and audio, compressed video. We haven't focused on this as much, but we're really looking at JPEG XS for that. Precise timing, but also simplified timing, so we can relax some of the extra constraints that we need to do a fully synchronized broadcast quality network. And then discovery, registration, connections, and then dynamic connections. So all those things are part of the roadmap. So let's talk about what are the benefits of IPMX. Well, first of all, this will be the first truly open specification for IP uncompressed media, okay? If you look at all the other ones out there, and I have a comparison chart at the end, we have HD base T, okay? In order to do HD base T, you have to buy the chipset from the company that makes the chipset. SDVOE is another one. There, you have to license the software stack from the company that produced it, okay? So those are, if you look at Dante AV, again, that's something you have to have a license to be able to use. So the idea here is that IPMX is going to be 100% open standard. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be royalty-free, but it is going to be, and we think it's there on royalty-free, but you never know. There's always some lurking patents. But we do believe that, but we know that all of the standards, all the specifications, it will be 100% open standard. So all the information you need to implement IPMX will be in the documents that we're publishing. So high quality video, lower cost than ST2110. We're adding in the high definition content protection, the HDCP, which is critical for a lot of content that is going to be distributed by Hollywood and people that have copyrights and things like that. Currently that works on HDMI. You know, we all use it every day. But doing it over an IP network is a little bit of a trick, and we'll talk about that. Another goal is that you'll be able to use IPMX equipment in a ST2110 network. So you can use IPMX receivers. To a certain extent, you can use IPMX as a gateway to bring an SDI signal or an HDMI signal into a 2110 type network. So it will be complementary to 2110 without replacing it 100%. And we have a couple of documents that are out. And this list is constantly changing. So now these documents are all freely available to anybody who wants to read them on the VSF website. That's vsf.tv, real easy to remember. And you can download any version of those specs that you want. So market drivers. Full-blown 2110 systems are kind of expensive. Prices are coming down, they're getting more attractive, et cetera, like that. A lot of times you need a very high-end switch to make it work properly, okay? PTP support is a challenge. I would have to say that most of the problems that I hear about where people are putting in 2110 networks is getting the precision time protocol stuff to work correctly. And uncompressed video consumes a lot of bandwidth. And of course, like I mentioned, SDVO, HDB, and I can't forget about NDI. How could I forget about that? That's another proprietary licensed technology. Another thing about IPMX is we need to go beyond the SMPTE standards. You know, we're used to 1080i, 720p, 1080p, 4G. Okay, those are all nice, well-packaged SMPTE standards that are out there for video formats. Well, in the Pro AV market, we need all kinds of stuff. We need wide XGA. We need all sorts of ultra-wide monitors, the stuff that people are buying and putting on their desks there. We need to support a much greater variety of video formats than what we currently do in 2110. So that's another thing that we're going to be doing in IPMX, okay? And we want automated, simple deployment. Of course, that's, apple pie and motherhood, but seriously, making it easy, making it so these systems can self-deploy, can self-configure is going to be a key benefit if we can make that happen. So, part of the JTNM was to identify some user requirements. So, A 4K 8-bit 444 desktop video compressed to under 800 megabits per second. And why is 800 megabits the magic thing? Because there's a lot of IP networks out there that are running on gigabit Ethernet. If we can get high quality video under 800 megabits per second, we're going to have the ability to really generate a very useful standard that can go throughout literally millions of different endpoints today. Thin desktop clients. Multicast display of protected content. Okay, that's a biggie. If I want to be able to take a sports game in and I want to feed let's say a recreational beverage facility, okay? I might want to have a half a dozen screens out there. I don't want to have to run point-to-point cabling from my video source to every single monitor that's out there. I want to run it over an IP network and let the network handle all that, the multicasting, things like that. High-quality video and audio without requiring PTP. Again, lowering the cost, making it so you don't need to have those fancy Grandmaster devices and things like that. More so in the Pro AV market than in the broadcast market, we would need to have very accurate multi-screen synchronization, so you can put up a big monitor wall and have all of your displays be synchronized, even if they have, you know, different content, tiling. Wide variety of display devices, and then, of course, low-cost networks that's supported by the IT department. You don't need to have a specialist in broadcast quality IP networks. So, and of course, we can address government, education, all those different things. Now, what happened here? Okay. So, support for functions used from Pro AV networks, asynchronous sources, protected content, multicast. We talked about this, non-broadcast video formats via the extended display ID. One of the key requirements is that an IPMX receiver can take an unmodified SMPTE 2110 narrow video source. So you can directly connect to that without any translation, any changes, whatever. So literally an IPMX equipped monitor could be deployed in a broadcast facility as a viewing device, and it would be just as good as any other monitor that's out there. And we also will work on networks that don't distribute a PTP clock, but if there is a PTP clock there, we want the IPMX devices to sync to it. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention at the beginning is if you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to, go ahead.
Each of the endpoints have a separate HTTP negotiation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I'll show you how that works. So, IPMX technical description. We'll talk about the architecture and the terminology, the transmitter timing and synchronization. We'll talk about the receiver synchronization and the display time alignment. We'll show you how to do that HTTP over an IP network, and then I'll show you a little bit about session description protocol. So here's a very simple IPMX architecture, and it's sort of hard to see on this display, but there's all the devices that are connected with a common reference clock are all synchronized. They all are connected to the same clock. Now, typically that's going to be PTP. If FPTP is available in a network that an IPMX sender or receiver is connected to, the devices are required to use that clock. They have to use that clock. It's built into the spec. If it's not available, they can use their own internal clock. Okay? So, source media device with synchronized media. So the media is actually synchronized to your reference source, i.e. it's going through the same frame sync that everything else is. Can go through an IPMX sender directly in a switch. If it's a 2110 sender, you don't need any adapter. Like I said, IPMX receivers can connect directly to ST2110 senders. There doesn't need to be any translator, anything in the middle that's going to convert between the two of them. But if we have an asynchronous media device, let's say this is a random feed. Let's say you have a camera that's not synced, okay? You can still send that video accurately through an IPMX network. And we do that, I'll give you a little preview, by putting extra information in the stream that tells you about the relationship between the clock of this incoming media stream and the system clock, okay? So we enable you to handle something that's not synchronized to the rest of your network, but still punch it through, okay? So, IPMX receivers, synchronous media. You know, if you're inside the cloud, your receivers are inside the cloud, these devices will come out in sync. Your IPMX receiver can also push this asynchronous media outside of the network. And this is a transparent link. So it's coming in asynchronous. Some random clock that it's picking up, it's a completely foreign feed, can go through a gateway, through the system to a receiver and come out, and that receiver output will be synchronized to this sender input. Okay, we preserve the timing of that asynchronous media signal. We don't try to, we're not running it through a processing DA. We're not reclocking it. We're transporting that transparently.
So what happens when you go to a synchronized destination?
So if you go to a synchronized destination, you basically have two choices. One is that you can do that frame sync function in your receiver and put out, you know, a synchronized sync. The other thing that you can do is that you could put a frame sync on the front here and push it through that way. But this is crucial. The reason why we did this is think about, let's say, a sports arena where you might have a wireless cam that's down on the field, you know, and maybe they're just doing, you know, the kiss cam, you know, whatever. They're showing, and it's not important. You're not using it in the broadcast or anything like that, but you want it to go through the same system as everything else. Well, by not forcing that camera and the displays that are hooked up to that camera to be synchronized to the common reference clock, you make that so much easier to implement as that mobile portable camera. Okay? You don't force that all to be synchronized. So, how do we do this? Well, IPMX devices must sync their internal clocks to that common reference. So the diagram I just showed you before, actually I'll just pop back to that. So any of these devices that are inside this architecture, these devices all need to sync to the common reference clock. Now, again, I'm not saying anything about where this media source is or where that destination is, but all these devices must use the common time reference if it's available. Okay? If PTP is not available, then the devices can use their own internal clock. Again, keeping things cheap and cheerful. But the key thing about IPMX, which is different than 2110, is that the media clock, the phasing, the alignment, the frequency of the incoming signal does not need to be aligned to PTP. Okay? That's a key difference. In 2110, basically all of your video sources need to have their media aligned with PTP. We call it the PTP epoch, all that good stuff. That's not required for IPMX. So if you have PTP, the device's internal clock can refer to it, or it can just be a free running internal clock if PTP is not available. So how do we you know, cut the watermelon here? So what we do is we add in on top of the regular messages that are coming out with 2110 is that for every frame of video, we give you an RTCP message, control protocol, not the actual RTP data packet itself, and we tell you the relationship between the timestamps that we're using for the media, the clock that we get from the media, and the PTP, whether it's the internal clock here or the PTP of the system. So every frame has an info block that's associated with it. Okay? Once I know that relationship, I can figure out the phase of this video relative to my PTP clock, and I can perfectly reconstruct that on the far side. Does that make sense? Do you understand what we're doing here? Is we're taking the RTP timestamps are unchanged, okay? They're going to work exactly the same way as with 2110. And they're tied to the media. If this media is synchronized, this message is basically superfluous. You don't need this message in order to get the video to go across the system. That's the basis of 2110. But if this media's clock is not synchronous to the internal clock of the system or to the PTP, then these messages allow you to figure out what the difference is between the timestamps on the packets and the actual system clock that's available. And now you can figure out how to generate an output stream that's a perfect replica of the input. You basically carry all the information you need for the clock of this incoming signal in these RTP timestamps and these RTCP packets. Yes, sir?
Does that basically mean you're coming up with a clock divided ratio and then regenerating a new clock locally at the end?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically, you know, you're going to look at the timestamps, and they're going to be accurate for the media. The timestamps on the RTP packets are going to be locked to the media, but the control packets will tell you how those timestamps relate to the PTP clock. Okay? It's a neat trick, but it solves a big problem. The idea is now I don't have to have these things. And by the way, this example here is for video. It will also work for audio. If I have an asynchronous audio coming through, I can put RTCP packets every 10 milliseconds or so and say this is a relationship between the media clock of that particular audio stream, which again is derived from the incoming media, and the PTP clock. So I can have an asynchronous audio come through my system just as easily as video. And there's just a couple notes here. So we use these PTP timestamps to correlate the RTP timestamps to the internal clock PTP. Only the first timestamp of a media flow must be synchronized to the internal clock. So that allows you over time to handle any differences that happen. So on the receiver side, now what we talked about, another important application of IPMX is these multi-tiled displays, okay? One of the things that's true about any network, in particular an IP network, is you don't know the link offset delay. How long does it take the packets to get to any particular receiver? Okay? Some could take a short path, some might take a longer path, what have you. One of the requirements for IPMX receivers is that they have the ability to measure their link offset delay. So they could tell you how soon relative to the common time frame, and again, this only works where you have a bunch of receivers all hooked up to a common clock. You know, there's no way to sync receivers that aren't all looking at PTP or the same internal reference clock. The receivers can report to the control system, hey, I'm seeing this much delay from my reference point. This one's saying I'm seeing this much delay. This one's saying I'm seeing this much delay. All those values are reported to a control system, and the control system can tell all those receivers, hey, we're gonna align those outputs by delaying the ones that arrived early, and we're going to give you all a common reference. So all of those displays can be in perfect synchronization. that's a big step forward. With 2110, because everything's synchronized, it's much less of a problem. Here, what we want, and we know the different link offsets and things like that, you know, we know that each one of these receivers will be able to synchronize. And in fact, even if you built a system with 2110 and all of your transmitters were in sync and all of your receivers were locked to the common epoch and everything like that, you still might have some delayed receivers coming out. You might have some with excess link offsets. You might have some slight phase difference between a couple of different monitors. This will lock it in 100%.
So the senders are sending a delayed signal to the receiver versus the receiver adding its own.
Well, no, actually what ends up happening is that the receiver will add its own delay to match up, but the control system will gather information from these receivers to figure out what is that optimal point. How much delay, what's the minimum amount of delay I have to add into all my receivers so they can all be aligned.
Well, is that a one-off measurement, or is it do it consistently throughout the transmission?
That's not, I don't think that's specified in the spec, but I would think that you'd want to keep that going, you know. Yeah, I don't think we specify how often you have to measure the link offset. Yes?
Can I ask you to put your mic on your shirt?
Sure. No problem. Okay. All right. So let's talk about our friend HDCP. Okay? So the interesting thing about this HDCP, and one of the reasons why it's one of the first specs that's out there, is because this is a very highly regulated field of endeavor. Okay? In order to get permission to send protected content over your network, you have to sign license agreements, you have to get things approved, et cetera. So this is built on some protocol stubs that they had already built into the HDCP spec to go over IP. So basically this is how it works. If you didn't have any of this stuff in the middle, if you had an HDMI device, you'd have an HDCP transmitter connected directly via HDMI to an HDCP receiver, and that would be like what all of us use every day, you know, hooking up our televisions and things like that. Point-to-point link over an HDMI cable. Okay? When we translate it into the IP domain, what we have to do is we have to receive that. So this device here, the gateway, acts as a receiver to that HDCP. Okay? And that makes the sender happy. It knows that it's sending to an authorized receiver. The encryption protocols are handed over. Everything. This is an exact point-to-point link. So this receiver looks exactly like this HDMI receiver here. We have permission from the powers that be in HDCP to take and create something that's called an HDCP IP transmitter. Okay? So that's going to take the output of this receiver and it's going to re-encrypt it and send it out over an IP network. Now that information is going to go over an IP network. It could be a multicast network. It's going to go to an HDCP IP receiver, okay, downstream. That receiver will be authorized. We'll talk about that in just a second. It will create an output that becomes an HDCP transmitter that works exactly like that HDCP transmitter would work with an HDMI device.
Will it be the same encryption that started it?
Yes. Now, the cool part is how do we make sure that these receivers are properly authorized? Well, we set up an individual connection over TCP/IP to authenticate and authorize each one of the receivers that's connected to the multicast. If they don't get authenticated, they will see an encrypted IP packet stream coming into them, and they won't be able to interpret that content. They won't be able to decode it because they won't have the keys for doing that. So this is a one-to-one relationship, as you were pointing out before. This HDCP IP transmit function has the ability to set up a dedicated channel, secure, over TCP IP. It's HTTPS, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. So it's a distinct point-to-point connection to each one of these receivers, and only once it's authenticated that receiver that this is a legitimate receiver, that it's got the necessary permissions, it's an authorized HDCP receiver, et cetera, et cetera. Once it's authorized that, then the encryption keys will be distributed from this source to that destination. Okay?
Now, the plug-and-play discussion you were talking about before, somebody's going to have to propagate these authorizations for this to work.
Correct, correct. It's just like building a display today with an HDCP receiver in it. You've got to have this IPMX receiver function in your receiver device in order to be able to play it. Now, whether this is built into the display or whether this is a standalone discrete box that somebody might make, doesn't matter, because this will be a secure connection. This will be a secure connection. And this has been approved by the HDCP folks. They say, yes, this network will meet those requirements. Yeah?
Is the IP part of HDCP an amendment or an addendum rather to the existing HDCP spec, or is it its own thing?
It's I don't remember if it's a new, I think it has a different number, but it's part of the HDCP. I mean, it comes out of the HDCP organization. I forget what their name is. Intel's a big player in there and everything like that.
What's the delay involved in this change?
So setup is going to take a little while. You know, it's no different than when you plug HDMI in. But once you've authenticated those receivers, there isn't any added delay going through. Yes, sir.
Doesn't the HDCP TXIP block have to ultimately query the HDMI sync at the very end to make sure it's not on the replication list?
That's the responsibility of this device here. You know, this is going to make sure that this guy's legitimate to talk to. So this guy knows he can talk to this guy, okay? But this still has to be licensed by HDCP. You know, this is just like any other sender out there. Okay?
Is there a max limit to how many downstream devices?
Yes. I believe the number is 32, but don't quote me on that. Okay? But you can do there is a way you can do a fan out. You know, you could make this receiver be another, you know, but there is a limit to how many downstream devices you can have authenticated. Yes, absolutely. Okay? Yeah.
Whose EDID does the source device?
Oh, that's a whole different question. That's why we do EDID through the control system, not through this. And this is what we had to come up with. In TR-05, and I don't want to take any credit for this. The guy who did the heavy lifting on that works at Matrox. But if you go, and you can download this, TR-05's, the IPMX HDCP Key Exchange Protocol, the KEP. So we've got a very fundamental layer that's, you know, secure containers. TCP back and forth. We have an HCAP software here that, again, has messages talking back and forth between it. And then the HDCP over RTP version 2.3. This is actually what came out of the HDCP Alliance. So basically, we took this top protocol, adapted it through this middle protocol, and having it run over regular TCP IP. It's a neat little piece of work, okay? And there's the spec. that you were asking about right there. So I guess it is an amendment. Okay? Very new stuff. Okay? So session description protocol. So anybody who's worked with 2110 for a while knows that session description protocol is a lot of the glue that holds together the system. So IPMX senders or gateways. So let me just, again, so we're clear on the terminology. A sender is originating a video source. A gateway is converting an incoming video into an IPMX stream. So it could be a DVD player, it could be a camera, it could be something else that's not IPMX. An IPMX raw sender could be a file store, it could be a graphics generator, it could be a PC that's running some, that's generating some sort of display for a scoreboard or something like that. So just to keep that right. So senders and gateways in their SDP include IPMX so that we know that the receivers getting that are going to be able to look for that very crucial RTCP packet, the one that's telling you about the synchronization between the media and the RTP timestamps. Gateways are kind of special. They're like a sender, but they're designed to bring in whatever kind of video you got and convert it into IPMX. So we include some extra parameters to make it easier for the receiver to configure itself. We include the measured pixel clock, okay? Just whatever pixel clock is measuring coming in. If your source isn't quite on frequency, it's going to give you a measurement, and that'll be something useful to the receiver. The V total and the H total, the total number of lines and the total number of samples per line of video. Audio IPMX gateways, we had a big fight about this, but this actually makes sense when you think about it. The IPMX gateways will give you a measured audio clock rate. And it's surprising how many audio sources out there aren't exactly 48 kilohertz. They might be, 47.9 kilohertz. And this gives you a shot in your receiver of getting your phase lock loop initialized properly and started off on the right thing if you know what the measured pixel clock, audio clock rate is. And then for the HCEP protocol, this is how those receivers connect to that TCP IP server. Basically, you give it a, basically it's a URL when you boil it all off, just how you connect to this particular sender that's doing the HCEP protocol so that each receiver can dial in and make its own TCP IP connection. All right?
How frequently does it send that connection information out?
This HCEP?
Because you don't know when somebody's got to connect up an endpoint.
Yeah, so that's going to be in the SDP of the sender. So however often the sender provides that SDP, any receiver that has the ability to get that SDP will be able to read that and process it. Yeah?
The words that go with HKEP.
The HDCP Key Exchange Protocol, HCEP. So that's how we get the key from one side to the other. All right, so here I put together this little comparison chart to show, sort of give you some of the rationale behind, what IPMX does as compared to ST2110, as compared to SDVOE, and as compared to HD-based T. And let's just go through this real quickly. So, uncompressed 4K 60p video. IPMX and 2110, yes, provided you have enough network bandwidth. SDVOE does not support that. They use a reduced frame rate. HD-based T does not support that, as currently implemented. Visually lossless compression. Now, it's kind of like a little bit of an oxymoron, visually lossless. I mean, what does that mean? Well, it's going to be a very, very high quality compression like JPEG XS, JPEG 2000 to a certain extent, whatever. But IPMX, 2110, and SDVOE all are capable of doing compression. HD-based does not. Network-based precision clock. Again, for IPMX, it's optional. Some of the features, like the receiver synchronization, won't work too well if you don't have a common reference clock. But the receivers will still work. And you can work with asynchronous sources. 2110, you require a clock. Your sources must be synchronized. They must be aligned to the epoch. Everything has to be, perfectly aligned. So that's a big difference there. And then SDVOE and HDBaseT don't require PTP. Open standard, 2110 is an open standard. IPMX is an open specification. Someday we hope it'll evolve into a standard. The other two, of course, are not. HDCP support, 2110 doesn't know anything about it. All of the other protocols do. 2110 compatibility, well, obviously IPMX and 2110 are, and the other ones aren't. Infrared control link. Well, HDBaseT has its beat on that. There is no functionality built in IPMX for doing that, although there's nothing to prevent you from doing that if you want to in your end devices. Power over Ethernet. Again, depends on how you're building your adapters. Power over HDBaseT. This 100-watt power. I don't know anybody else is going to do that besides the HDBaseT folks. Data channel. This is kind of a funky thing. SDVOE and HDBaseT include a data channel up to 1 gigabit here, up to 100 megabits per second here. You don't need a data channel with IPMX or ST2110. If you need to get data from point A to point B, you just put it on your network. You don't need to bundle it into one of these other funky standards.
Where does NDI go?
Yes, I didn't want to forget about NDI. So NDI, so the intellectual property is owned by VizRT. If you want to license it, you need to sign an NDA, and you also have to make royalty payments. It's well suited for live production. A lot of people are using it. A lot of houses of worship, a lot of educational other facilities are using it. They have a very good registration and discovery. You plug a couple of NDI devices together in a switch, they find each other and figure out what they're doing. It is based on discrete cosine transform, so it is a lightly compressed format. 16 lines of delay in a tuned system. I don't think this is the world's best compression format, but it works, okay? Frequently implemented with 1 field of delay per encode decode hop. So every time you go from compressed to uncompressed, anytime you want to do a switch, any kind of visual effects processing, any type of stuff like that, you're going to introduce a field of delay in most of your typical NDI applications. And as far as I know, and I might be wrong on this, but I have not heard of NDI talking at all about HDCP or EDID. Okay? They're not talking about that because they're thinking about live production and things like that. So anyhow, let's do a quick time check here. So it's about 20 after 7. Let me just show you a chart that I put together. I just wrote an article for TV Technology about some of the new stuff that's coming out for 2110. So if you look at the core specifications for 2110, most of them came out either in 2017 or 2018. The system timing, the video, the traffic shaping, basic digital audio. We did the AS3 and some ancillary data stuff. Those came out in 2018 if you look at the dates on the documents. Those are all being updated, have all been updated, except for the Dash 40, and that is lost somewhere at SMPTE. I don't know where the heck it is. I called the guy who's supposed to know, and he says, geez, I don't know why it hasn't been published yet. So we're on the case of that. That'll probably come out with a 2022 dash number on it. So all of these specs have been updated, okay? The good news is they haven't been radically changed. We didn't go in and make a lot of, oh, well, let's fix this or let's make this better or any of that kind of stuff. The idea was if there's a lot of fielded equipment built on the 2017 and 2018 specs, we don't want to break any of that stuff that's out there, okay? So I'll just give you a quick overview of the things that we've done in these new specs. 2110, we clarified some things about how the clocks work. We clearly separated the RTP clock from the media clock. We mandated that you can't send out any fragmented IP packets, so you can't send something that's larger than your network will allow and have fragmentation. That's not allowed. We clarified that there's a couple of multicast addresses you're not supposed to use. But the biggest thing that we did with 2110 is we added in a new function, a TS delay. And if you look, this is very similar to what we're talking about in IPMX. And in fact, we're going to go back and take a look at IPMX and see if TS delay will do all the things that we need to for that receiver synchronization function. We added a new parameter, and again, this is not required. It's recommended, but it is optional, that we're going to allow senders to say, the clock that's coming out, is it something that is sampled so that I'm taking it directly from the camera? Am I preserving the timestamps that come in on my RTP timestamps, or am I putting on new RTP timestamps? And if you start doing a system analysis, that's really critical information to understand how the packets flow through your network and how their timestamps are going to be modified or not modified. So this is all available in the new version of the spec. But it doesn't obsolete the old stuff. It's just a much cleaner way of telling downstream devices how all this timing, how the timestamps have been created. For 2110, we just added some good stuff. We added slog3. We added a new colorimetry that's alpha, so that it's not some bastardized color format for a key signal. And if you're not using those two things, just use the old standard number. And then we made some other clarifications. Nothing. This is a biggie. There was a typo in the first version of the spec that put an extra semicolon in that shouldn't have been there, but now the word is out and everybody has to be able to handle having a semicolon or not having a semicolon. 2110-21, we clarified that for compressed video, you don't need to worry about receiver buffer calculations. And then we updated the way that some of the calculations were done for interlaced video. It's funny, you know, we wrote a spec for interlaced video that only worked with 1080i. If you look at the numbers, it didn't work with standard def. Can you believe that? So we had to go back and fix the formulas in there so that the formulas will work both for 1080i and for standard def. Thank goodness we got rid of interlace when we went to 4K, right? You know. Now, if only we could get rid of fractional frame rate. You know, anyhow. Compressed video, constant bit rate compressed video. Basically, again, it clarified that the virtual receiver buffer models don't apply. And then we clarified exactly how you define the bit rate. This is actually one of the things that I pushed really hard for. Getting a compressed signal that says, okay, well, we're compressing this with JPEG XS or we're compressing this with H.265 or whatever is useful information. But if you don't know what the bandwidth is, how do you provision your network? How do you, make sure that your receiver is going to be able to handle it and things like that? So we had to put in a bandwidth spec, and we did it a little bit wrong, so this has been fixed up. Just clarified how to do it. 2110-31 is actually really interesting. There are two different ways of handling the F bit between AES3 and AES10. I don't know if you got any of you folks know Andreas Hildebrand from Ravenna. He's the guy that pointed this out, and we had to clarify all that stuff. We clarified that things are using the same frequency, and then we added in this funky MIME type to handle non-PCM audio. So that's a handy little thing. 2110, this is the one that's missing in the SMPTE publishing queue, but one of the things that we noticed was that the original spec for ancillary data said your packet has to be within a millisecond of the nominal time when you want that. Well, for a lot of applications, that's a lot of slop. A millisecond could be a few, 100 lines of video in some cases, certainly dozens in a lot of other cases. So there's this new, again, optional parameter that you can say that we're using the low latency transmission model, which means that our ancillary packets out are coming out within 6 lines of where they need to be. So it gives you a much tighter tolerance. But again, we didn't break the old thing. And we specified that you aren't supposed to do audio over 2110-40. And, oh, this is another little thing. It wasn't in the spec. If your ancillary packets are coming in on SDI in a certain order, well, it wasn't specified that you had to put them out in the same order when they went out in 2110-40. So this cleans that up and then cleans up the SDP considerations. All right. Fast metadata. Fast metadata was a cool idea. The idea was that we were going to go in and put all the data that you need that's in the SDP file in a control packet. Those have been somewhat, let me put it, how do I put it this way? How do I put it? There's been a lot of discussion about whether we need that functionality or not. And up until very recently, the crowd was going with the thought that, well, we really don't need these. We're going to stop working on these as specifications. However, these might still come out. And let me just explain what the heck they are, okay? Sometimes you need metadata that's synchronized with something that's not a video frame. For example, audio metadata. You need a way to send ancillary data about audio for some of the high-end Dolby audios and things like that, where you don't have a video stream associated with it. It's just an audio stream. So the idea is that we have a mechanism for doing that within 2110-41 and -42. The jury's still out as to whether we're actually going to produce those, but stay tuned. We'll know more later this year. Okay. This one did come out, 2110-43. Time text markup language is the way that we're going to be doing captions and subtitles. And there's an RFC out on that, and then 2110-43 just builds on that and brings it into a full 2110 standard. Okay? And basically all the stuff that you need to know is in this RFC if you want to go download that. Anyhow, that's really that's all that we've changed. All those other things, 5 years on, 2110 is a very stable format. Like we said, added some new video formats, clarified a bunch of stuff, put in a couple of nice features for the ancillary data, but that's it. We're not messing around with the fundamentals. So stuff that was built to the 2017 spec should work with all this newer stuff going forward. So that's a really big thing. I think, we tried really, really hard to make sure that that stuff happened. And that's it. That's my contact info. If you'd like to get a hold of me, I have some business cards somewhere. If you want to talk to me. I do want to mention that we're in the process of updating the 2110 course provided by SMPTE to include the newest version of the specs that literally, they came out on December 20th. I think that was the day. That's when I got the email that they were finally posted. So we're in the process now of incorporating those new updates into the 2110 course, but that's available through SMPTE. You get a discount if you're a SMPTE member. I also am working on, in background mode, updating the IP video for media engineers course that, again, is part of SMPTE. So feel free, they're on the website. We've got some courses starting in March if you'd like to learn more. And then one of these days we'll talk about IPMX in a true SMPTE environment, but you know, who knows how long it's going to take to write the standards. Yes, sir?
Question for you. What's the adoption rate of SMPTE 2110, do you think, in the broadcast community?
So,
Could you repeat the question?
yeah. So the question is, you know, what is the adoption rate of 2110 in the broadcast community, okay? So basically, if you're building a greenfield facility today, 2110 is going to be your default, okay? If there's some reason that you can't use 2110, you might stay with SDI. But anybody who's building a new facility today of any significant size is going to do that. Now, if you're replacing a router, okay, you know, because it's gone end of life, it's become a member of the museum here, right? You know, it might not make sense to, you know, especially if it's a small router, might not make sense to do that. But if you do the math, and this is according to my friend John Mayotte, he says if it's over 512 cross points, 2110 is going to be cheaper, even if you consider the cost of converting the signals into and out of 2110, just because of the size and the expense of a 512 router. So people are still building SDI-only facilities, okay? But those folks are boxing themselves in, I believe, because they're not, you know, SDI is going to have a lot of trouble with high dynamic range, which I think is a killer app. They're going to have trouble converting to new formats like 1080p or 4K. And they're going to lose the flexibility that you get with an IP-based system. You know, IP-based system today, you can do 50 hertz. Next week, you can do 5994. You can have those mixed on the same network. You can have high dynamic range and standard dynamic range intermixed on the same. You can have S-Log3. All those things will all play on the same infrastructure. You really can't do that in a traditional SDI switching environment. So there's still, from what I understand, there's still a cost premium to some of the endpoints with 2110. But I believe that that's going away because it's a heck of a lot cheaper to put an RJ11 jack, you know, or RJ45, RJ11's phone, sorry, showing my age. RJ45 jack in a piece of equipment with a little, you know, with a little piece of glue logic in there versus, or just an empty SFP cage versus building in SDI and 2110. So, personal opinion. Yes, sir?
Are IPMX endpoints that are ordinary clocks allowed to become grandmasters if they're not a real grandmaster on the network?
So your question is, are IPMX endpoints that are ordinary clocks allowed to take over as grandmaster? Yes. If they start broadcasting a PTP signal, the other ones will lock to that. So you don't have to have a grandmaster, you know, an official certified, because that's fundamentally the way that PTP works, you know.
Is it required for your endpoints to support that?
All IPMX devices must sync to PTP if that PTP signal is available on the network. They don't need to be able to take over as grandmaster, okay? But they have, if PTP is available, IPMX says you must use that as your clock source and use that for your internal clock. It doesn't mean you have to use it for your media clock. It doesn't break that asynchronous stuff that we talked about. But it does make sure that all the IPMX devices in the network that can see the same clock are all going to be synchronized together. Makes a lot of... That's part of PTP. You know, if each clock has a set of 5 different priority codes, and if all of those are equal, the one with the lower MAC address will take over, and the other one is supposed to shut itself off. But that's one of those tricky things to configure in PTP. Yeah, it's a little tricky. It's a little tricky, you know, to make sure, you know, to make sure that Yeah, what you want to make sure is that the $5,000 super duper Telestream Grandmaster that you purchased doesn't lose out to this the microphone that you happen to have sticking off of this one leg over here. You have to make sure that the microphone is configured correctly and that the PTP Grandmaster is configured correctly so that the one that you want to win the battle does win the battle. And it's tricky. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your attention.